some time-saving ways to incorporate some of those good foods into our lunches and dinners?
Um, the same way, you know, you're overall just trying to make small changes over the course of time. So, you know, you'll hear a lot of people talk about meal prepping, you know, on Sundays and getting prepared for the week, or, you know, mapping out your entire week's worth of groceries and only buying the foods that go with those things so that you don't have this refrigerator full of things and then things go bad or you're not prepared and think, you know, I think that when it comes to time saving efforts, it's going to be different for every person. But what I like to tell people is kind of implementing the same principles as making a huge lifestyle change, right? Is start small and only make a couple of changes as you go along. I think it's less daunting to keep the consistent foods incorporated with a new food. And you know, if you are the kind of person that likes to meal plan and prep for the whole week, or half the week, or you do it a couple of times a week where you're making a bunch of things and then you're just eating leftovers because that saves you time during the week, then add in one new thing. You know, if you're going to batch cook a bunch of soup, throw in a new vegetable into that soup, or think of something that you can change it up with. Maybe reducing the amount of sodium that's in the soup, or maybe you're having the soup without a lot of bread and butter, right? Or whatever that change is for you, making that change when you're batch cooking. If it is, maybe I'm terrible at planning my meals, making a very strict grocery list and going to the store and only buying those things, right? Because I'll do that, but then I'll buy like 9 other things because all these things are on sale and I'm completely off track. So I think that time saving is going to vary from person to person, but my recommendation is when we start thinking about making changes, we immediately think the same way, kind of that what we talked about before, is you think you have to do like this grocery overhaul. You have to clean out your refrigerator and you clean out your pantry, and now you have to make all these new, you know, choices for meals to make, and you have to plan better, and it's daunting, and again, it becomes unsustainable because you have these really high expectations for what you need to do in order to eat healthy. You don't have to do a lot to make different choices. You don't have to plan differently. You don't have to, you know, go overboard on the way that you plan your week. It's as simple as making one little addition every time you make a favorite meal. It's as simple as, you know, I even wrote a note down. I was like, how to make, you know, healthy lunches and dinners with kids in mind. You know, I have a 5 and 8-year-old, both boys. Both couldn't be different in, you know, any more than they are. Total polar opposite ends of the spectrum as it comes to food, let alone everything else. But kids need consistency regardless. So if you think that I'm going to save time and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z and I'm going to make all these changes, kids are going to flip out. And if you're making really drastic changes to what they're eating, they're not going to eat it. So keeping things consistent for them as well. And if you are going to add something new to, say, their lunches at school, you know, you can add, if you want to add carrots to their lunch, for example, I get the regular carrots, like with the green stuff hanging off the end. And so it looks like a carrot, you know, to my kids. And my little one, I call them Captain Carrots that help you see in the dark. You know, so all of a sudden carrots just became really weird, and they're going, well, how do they help me see in the dark? We're like, I don't know, eat them and tonight we'll see if it works. You know, or it's brainy Brussels sprouts and they help you read minds, you know, so then they try up, because when you cut a Brussels sprout open, it has the little lines like lettuce, you know, and it looks like a brain, you know, so, you know, and then I tell them, okay, test me, see if you can read my mind. And then whatever they say, I say, you're right, it worked, you know, making food fun, but you're just adding one new thing to their macaroni and cheese. You're adding one new thing to whatever it is that they eat, and you're not overwhelming yourself. Don't feel like, you know, I don't have time to eat healthy because it requires too much preparation. It shouldn't, because if you're doing it in a slow process and you're making it fun, then it's less burdensome. So again, I would just say small changes over the course of a week or 2 at a time, and stay consistent for your kids. That's the biggest piece of advice I can give on that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sounds good. What about budget? Sometimes I hear that, you know, that idea, oh, I have to eat the packaged foods because I really just don't have the money for the fresh food, fruits and vegetables. What would you say to that struggle?
That's a difficult one for me because I made the transition to a more whole food plant-based diet versus not. And I say not because the other side of whole food plant-based can look very different for people, but let's just say animal products and, you know, meat and dairy and things like that multiple times a week versus maybe once a week, right? So I went more plant-based, more of my meals are plant-based options. So that's more produce, right? More vegetables, things like that. I made that transition personally so I can see the difference in my budget, but budgets are relative. So someone's budget is always going to look different for each family. It's going to be really hard to say, you know, one thing is going to be better than another to keep you inside this healthy food budget. But what I can say is the more packaged and processed your health foods are, the more expensive they likely are. Because if you're buying, say, a 4-pack of Dr. Prager's veggie burgers, you're going to be paying way more money than if you made your own black bean burgers and then froze them, right? There's less ingredients in those. They really don't take that much time. In the time that you would actually warm up a veggie burger and get it prepared to eat, you could have made 10 black bean burgers and froze them. And that kind of ties into the whole you know, time saving efforts and meal planning and prepping that doesn't always work for people, which I get. But when you're talking about budget, you're either going to buy packaged health food or you're going to make your own using fresh produce. And that's going to be different from person to person. But fresh produce is always going to be a better option. And consider frozen food. Frozen vegetables, frozen fruits, because when you purchase frozen, one, you're getting more per pound. 2, they're picked at the peak of ripeness. So there's often more nutritious than, say, fresh produce that's sitting out. I'm always looking for produce sales. Sprouts has produce sales constantly. I can get a ton of fresh produce for pennies. It's really not that expensive. It gets expensive when you think that in order to eat healthy, you have to buy pre-made health foods. That's when it gets expensive. When you are buying pre-made veggie burgers, it's expensive. When you're buying organic sauces, it's expensive. But if you choose a handful of things that you are unwilling to make on your own, and then the majority of your plate is some steamed broccoli and some rice and, you know, a handful of other things. If you can just choose a small amount of things that maybe you just don't have the time to make yourself, and the rest of it is fresh produce, it becomes very cost effective to eat healthy, because especially if it's frozen, you're getting more per pound. And if you're looking for sales, I look at the cost of, say, a big thing of chicken and the same weight in vegetables, there is no comparison, because I could spend $15 on chicken, right, which is one aspect of a meal, versus $15 in vegetables and fruit, which, if you think about it, is a lot more fruits and vegetables than chicken. And those fruits and vegetables now are sides to lunch and dinner. They are snacks for your kids. They're snacks in the car. It goes a long way. So I think the mindset around cost of food has to shift a little bit to see that it really is more cost effective to eat healthy than it is to not. You just have to kind of pick and choose where you're willing to spend the money, looking for the sales, and considering buying frozen. I think that there's a misunderstanding or an assumption that frozen vegetables and fruit are not as healthy, and it's quite the opposite.
Yeah, I agree. And even the canned ones, you can buy with less sodium and less salt in them, and that's pretty inexpensive too.
It really is, and you make a really good point, because when you look at canned fruits and canned vegetables, especially in beans and things like that, if you do, especially with beans, just one little nutrition tip: if you are buying canned beans, get the ones that are low or no salt added. And then right before you cook them, rinse them. Don't soak them or anything, but kind of rinse them off a little bit and get some of whatever might be on there off, and clean them up a little bit, and then eat them or cook them. Even bagged beans and cooking them all together and batch cooking it. And those last you a week or 10 days, where you can add them to a meal and make bowls, things like that. It gets very cost effective when you start to think with that mentality.
Yeah, absolutely. I like what you say too about the products. Some of this is just sort of experimenting and trying out some things. Maybe you've never made your own veggie burgers, but it can be very simple. It doesn't have to be complicated.
It doesn't, and Pinterest offers you a lot of ideas.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Awesome. So we're in that holiday season and there's so much yummy food out there and parties and it's